Hello everyone, Reza here. In Power Automate approvals, if we have multiple approvers defined and the approval task is pending, how do we identify which approvers are pending a response? How can we get information about the approvers who responded? What were their responses, their comments? And how to make all of this reusable is what this video is all about. So let's check it out in action. Let's begin with a simple approval workflow process in Power Automate. My flow triggers manually. The first action is to start and wait for an approval. As part of this action, we have various types of approvals that we can leverage. And for each of these approval options that we select, we can have one or more approvers. In case we have a single approver defined, once the approver responds, the start and wait for an approval action completes and the flow moves ahead. But what if we have multiple approvers defined and this flow is waiting? How do I identify which approvers is this flow waiting on? There can be a scenario where you would like to send a reminder notification to the pending approvers so that they can go ahead and take their decision. If the approval type is everyone must approve, each approver has to say approve. If the first approver approves, the flow still waits for the second approver. If any one rejects, the action is rejected. Wait for all responses. It will wait for every approver to provide a response. In this case, my approval type is everyone must approve, and I'm assigning this to Reza and Sarah. Now, once this task completes and the flow moves ahead, then we have the full flexibility to read the information from the output of this action. For example, here, I am reading the responses array, which is a dynamic content property from the start and wait for an approval action. I get that array, and from that array, I get the name of the approver, the decision that they took, what comments did they enter, and there are other pieces of metadata as well that I can capture. And typically, once an approval outcome is achieved, we would like to take some form of action. And for that, we add a condition. Is the outcome of the approval, if it does not contain reject, meaning every approver said approve, in that case, in the true branch, I can define what actions I would like to take if the outcome is approve. Send an email, update status, etc. The false branch will be executed the moment an approver rejects. So that's the premise of this workflow. Let's go ahead and run this workflow. The flow has triggered. It has begun the process of creating that approval task for Reza and Sarah. Reza receives the approval email for that approval task. Sarah as well receives an approval task. The approval action is everyone must approve. Let's say Sarah approves it, enters her comments, submits her response. Even though Sarah has responded, the flow is waiting because everyone must say approved. How can I find out who is the approver whose response is pending? Which approver responded? What decision did they take? Now, finding information about an existing approval task requires understanding of how approvals are stored. In the Power Automate approval scenario, the information for approvals is stored in Microsoft Dataverse. If I sign in to the Maker portal for Power Apps or Power Automate and head over to Tables, this will list out all the Dataverse tables for that environment. Here, if I search for approval, this lists out all the tables where the approval information is stored. There are various tables that are related with each other that handle this entire approval process in the backend. I have created a flow which is a reusable flow. This flow triggers manually and it takes a couple of input parameters. It requires the ID of the approval. Each time an approval is created, a unique ID is generated for it in Dataverse. There is a second parameter called send reminder email, and this is of type Boolean yes or no. The first action is get a row from ID in Dataverse. Here I point to the main approvals table which has information about the approval. For that, I need the ID of the approval, and that I am fetching from the parameter that will be passed to this flow when this flow is triggered. Each approval will have one record in the approvals table. I've initialized a Boolean variable called where approval pending, and I've initialized its value to true. Then I have a condition. In this condition, I am checking to see the approval stage information. If that is not equal to complete, that means this approval is in pending state. There is still action pending on some approvals. If the approval is complete, then the false branch gets called, and all I'm doing here is I'm setting that variable of mine, which is of type Boolean called where approval pending, to false. If the approval is pending in the true branch, the first step I take is I go and query another table called approval requests. So for each approver where an approval action was requested, an entry is made in the approval requests table. So go and grab all the approval requests where the approval ID is the ID that's passed to this flow. Next step, I use the select data operation action, in which for each of those approval requests obtained, I'm going and grabbing the name of the user to whom that approval task is assigned, as well as their email address. So I store that in this array. Then I go and query another table called approval responses. Each time an approver responds, then an entry is made in the approval responses table. Go and get all the approval responses for the specific approval ID. Once again, create an array that includes the details of the users who have responded. So how do I know which ones have not responded? I have to compare these two arrays, and for that I have used the data operation action filter array. Based upon the responses in the approval requests array, does the approval responses array not contain these values? So this will give me the approvers who have not responded. So I have pending approvers as well as the approvers who have responded. I then have a condition. My trigger action, I passed a parameter. Should we send the reminder email to the approvers who are pending a response? If that value is true, then I loop through the array of approvers who have not responded and start sending them a nicely formatted reminder email based upon the approval task that is pending. It also includes a deep link directly for the approver to take the action. This completes the true branch. And right at the end, I have an action respond to a Power App or flow. Here I pass information back to the app or flow that calls this flow of mine. I send the following details. Approvers who have not responded, I send that JSON array back as a string. I send the details of approvers who have responded with their details about their approval decision that they took. And lastly, I also send that variable value back to let the caller of this flow know whether the approval ID that they passed, is it pending or is it completed. This entire flow is a reusable flow. The key to building reusable flows is to always build your flows in the context of a solution. I have a solution called approvals pending. In this solution, I have created my flow. And because this flow is manually triggered, another flow that is also in a solution can call this flow. And this concept of flow reusability is known as child flows. This flow, get pending approvals information, has been created by my account. Whenever you're calling a child flow, one of the key things we have to do, run only users. This reusable flow, I can share it with other users by simply defining their names right here. I can also share this with security groups. In this case, I've shared the flow with Sarah. One key aspect of child flows is the connections that the child flow is using. In my case, there are two connections, Microsoft Dataverse and Office 365 Outlook. Both of these have to run under a context of a connection. In this case, it's my connection that is being used to execute the actions for Dataverse and Outlook. If I set the connections to run only user, then you cannot make this flow a reusable flow. So in this case, it's Reza's connection that's being used. Since I am querying Dataverse using my account to get approval information, and all of these flows and solutions, they all live in the context of environments, I have to make sure that the user that's calling these approval tables has the approvals administrator security role assigned to them. That role will give the user the full permissions on all the approvals tables. So I have my child flow ready, running under Reza's account. Of course, I as the owner can call it, but beyond that, I've also shared it with Sarah. So if Sarah is creating a workflow in this environment, as long as Sarah is creating the flow in a solution, she can also call this reusable flow. Let's try it out with Sarah's account. Signed in as Sarah, Sarah goes to solutions, and Sarah will create a solution, give the solution a name, and now Sarah can go and create a flow. The flow can trigger automatically, manually, or on a schedule. In this case, I'll pick Instant Cloud Flow, manually trigger this one. Sarah would like to create her approval task. If she searches for approvals, if Sarah uses start and wait for an approval, the flow at that point will start the approval and pause until the approval action is complete. Instead of using start and wait for an approval, we can use a combination of two actions, create an approval and wait for an approval, that exactly does the same thing as start and wait for an approval. The difference is I can create an approval action, get details about the approval, like the approval ID, and then wait until the approvers respond. So let's try that. I'll create an approval. Here I'll pick everyone must approve. I'll assign this approval task to Reza and Sarah. And then I will wait in the flow until the approval action is complete. All I need here is the ID of the approval that I can get with dynamic content. And right after this, I can take my standard steps. What's the outcome of the approval? Go send notifications, update statuses, and so on and so forth. But now the flexibility that we get is while the flow is waiting, I can add a parallel branch here and take actions in parallel. Here, we'll add the reminder process. I will use the do until control. Do until keeps executing these actions until a certain condition is met. The condition being met is the approval action waiting is complete. So what I'll do here is, right before this, I'll add an action. I'll initialize a variable where approval completed boolean. I'll set this to the expression false. Where I was waiting for the approval, right after that action, I will set a variable. I will set that variable to the expression true. This do until loop, I will run this under the condition where approval completed is equal to the expression true. So this loop will keep running until this approval is waiting. Once the approval is complete, the variable becomes true. This loop will complete. Do until has limits. Notice here there's a timeout PT1H. That's total 1 hour timeout. I'll just go and remove this. So I don't want to define a boundary of time. The first action I will take is a delay action. This is the delay before sending the pending approvers a reminder that they have to respond. Now, how long do you want to wait before you send the reminder emails? So every 3 days, the approver does not respond, they will receive a reminder. Or give them daily reminders. In this case, for the demo, I'm setting it to 1 minute. Please don't do this in real world scenarios. And right after this, that flow that I created is a reusable flow. I'll type child and search for the flows action. There is an action here called run a child flow. This will list out all the child flows that I have access to. Here is that get pending approvals information flow that I can call. This requires 2 parameters. The approval ID that I get using dynamic content. And do you want to send an approval reminder? I'll say yes. Done. Now this child flow action gives out a lot of good details as well. And just to prove it, I'll add a compose action right after this. Here, for the run a child flow action, JSON string of pending approvers will include all the details of the approvers whose decisions are pending. JSON string of responded approvers along with their decisions and details. Once I set the variable to true, right after that, I should also go ahead and terminate the flow successfully. Why? Well, because if the approvers have responded, this do until action may still be waiting depending upon my delay. And that's the reason why I'll go ahead and terminate the flow. I'll save this flow. Let's go ahead and test this flow out. The flow triggers, creates the approval task. The flow is waiting till that approval is complete. And on the other side, the do until loop will begin. Both Sarah and Reza would have received the approval task. Let's say Sarah approves it, submits her response. the approval action is still waiting because there's another approver who still has to give his decision, which is Reza. Now, Reza has not yet responded, and I want Reza to receive reminders periodically until he gives his response. That job will be done by this do until branch. Let's go to Reza's mailbox. Here is the approval task. Here is the reminder. The reminder says, "Hello Reza, there is a reminder for your approval task. It has the name of the task. Please review and provide your approval decision." Here is a button that if Reza clicks, will directly take Reza, this is deep linking, to that approval task in Power Automate Approval Center. Here's the task, and Reza can directly take his decision. My reminders were set for 1 minute, so just to prove it, every minute Reza is going to receive a reminder email until he responds. I better respond to this one. I respond. There we go. Notice the flow, the left-hand side branch here, wait for an approval, completed. I get all the details of the approval response that I can use. It set that variable and I terminated the flow. The flow is complete, it's successful. The do until loop will not run anymore. And Reza will not be receiving any more reminders for this task because the task is complete. And now if I look at that reusable flow and explore the flow details, this is last when the flow ran. If I select this, we can see the response the flow provided. The body attribute. The response includes, is the approval pending? It was true. The last time it ran, Reza's response was still pending. Sarah had responded. JSON string of responded approvers. Username, Sarah. This is Sarah's email address. Sarah had said approved, and this was the command that Sarah entered. And whose approval response is pending? Reza's approval response is pending. So it includes Reza's name and email. This reusable flow you can use for any type of approval. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching.